facility was not proper, maybe the charts were not proper, maybe the pilots were not well trained or certified. Now it has caused a huge problem, to everybody around, and now because perhaps somebody at some time, cut some corners, So let us be very sure of, how we are going about it, and so that from that point of view there is no downside. Second issue is that, also from the, say take the example of Shell Hazira. Shell is one of the as best as you can get, but even there also they have a huge problem of siltation, which they did their calculation, but still, something went wrong. And these are the risks in the green field, that is why this apprehension is there. So maybe we need to have, a better study that before we,
So what you're saying is there are federal ports which are major ports, there are state ports which are typically minor ports. What you are probably hinting at, not directly saying, is the regulatory regime in some of the state ports in terms of the safety and the navigational side is weak, which could lead to a whole lot of concerns, and that's something which probably needs to be examined by the government and somebody so as to make.
Yes. You see the port, like say take Jamnagar, the Reliance.
Yeah.
They have themselves made sure that there is no such concern. They have gone more than what was required, and they have made sure that the port operates safely.
Yeah.
So both the investors as well as financiers, okay, regulatory regime should be there and it should be transparent, it should be visible. But even if, while the gap is there, the investors and the financiers should both make sure, from that angle, that the operation of the port is absolutely top class, and this will not hinder the long-term prospect of operating the port safely.
I would like to add that sometime in captive ports or jetties, the problem, as Captain Sagi says, of safety of shipping could be an issue, because a whole host of studies and arrangements and training and safety equipments
Are for the major ports.
Are to be provided. So captive port may be finding it very difficult to set up that kind of an establishment and incur those costs. Whereas in a fully functioning port which is a comprehensive port, open to all, catering to large number of clients, there the systems operate much better because they have to establish these basic systems. But having said that, I must also say that accidents like grounding, etc., have taken place in Bombay port also, though it's a major port with two ports here, in the past. And typically they occur in the monsoon time. And therefore we have to give a bit of allowance given the best that you do with the navigational training of captains and the ship and everything. And probably those things, if you see the history, most of the time it is during monsoons that these groundings and have taken place. So that probably there also in Ratnagiri, it is this monsoon only this has happened. I don't know whether it was preventive or otherwise, but the point that I am trying to make is that comprehensive ports, whether they are non-major or major, they would have far better arrangement. There is a much better regime. There is a navigational safety committee which is headed by Captain Sagi. They clear the navigation to these ports. Without that, the navigation cannot start. They see the systems are there. And the operators also take care because they would like port to operate, not to get stand still because of some accidents. But in captive ports, and that is what the Ratnagiri jetty is, there could be these issues. So there is an issue to that extent.
Also the port insurance is one issue, which people should look at seriously, because there are so many other risks, like say pollution risk.
Yes.
Or, for example, we should be aware of all the risks. For example, if a ship is heading into a port, a big tanker, it runs aground, causes pollution. Now, as per international convention, there is what we call the fund convention, up to almost a $1 billion cover is there. Now, the fund will pay to fishermen, to tourists, or to whosoever is affected. There can be a power plant, all that will shut down, and the compensation will be paid. But fund as a recourse action can recover this money from the port if it is found that it was due to the port's fault. So port should first of all have itself cleared from all the regulatory point of view, and secondly have also covered through proper insurance regime, so that if such an eventuality is there, the downside is taken care of. So while investors and insurance company both should make sure that these things are in place, that would give them more comfort.
Yeah, Mr. Sinha, you've been with the Maritime Board, you've been with the major port, deputy chairman there, and you're now running a private port. Now, when it comes to the regulatory regime and the safety and the other things, what do you think are the standards there? Because some of the investors would be very worried, and there was an industry. I mean, I'm saying there was an industry like aquaculture. I used to be part of a bank, SCICI, which used to finance such projects, and one fine morning the entire industry got wiped out because of the disease, and there was very poor regulation which was there, and many investors, of course it was more through the capital market route, people had invested and they had raised a lot of capital, and all that got wiped out because they could not really control that part, and there was a Supreme Court directive to close many of the units which was there. So some of this safety and some of these concerns may come from international quarters. So, how does an investor cope up with that, and does the management quality become very important? Not everybody could be Maersk, but of course there are private entrepreneurs who are trying to set up. So, what do you think needs to be done to assuage the concerns of the investors as well as create?
Actually, it's very important to build a safety culture. And other aspect, all the risks must be put on the table and fully studied and covered. Now, this risk assessment is a very important part. That throws up many issues, areas which need to be looked at. Now, the risk typically will be assessed on the scale 1 to 10. If it happens, what could be the consequence, repercussions? For example, a grounding may close the port. And then what are the mitigation actions which are possible so that grounding does not take place? 2. And if that takes place, what is the risk? It comes to 1 or 0. And then the other part of following from risk is the contingency planning. If it happens, what needs to be done? Now typically when port is to be constructed, these also start as a study. Simultaneous action takes place to build those kinds of standards of procedures, SOPs as we call it, based on the risk assessment. And certain risks must be covered by insurance, like the natural risk of floods, for example, earthquake, or that kind of a thing must be taken. Also, some business risk if you think that port can come to smooth. So those kind of things are taken upside insurance. There are some risks which will have to be taken, for example, power. Port does not get power supply, stable power supply. The equipments won't run efficiently. So it may require a captive power plant. So that needs to be seen whether you do need it, or what do you do to get a stable, copious, good quality power supply. Like that, all these risks are to be assessed. Now, I would say that financial institutions and investors, whosoever they are very particular on this. Because the investment will be at risk if these risks are not covered. There is not much cost to these risks if they are built over a period of time. But if all the risks are to be covered at one point of time, then it may become an expensive proposition. But over a period of time as you go, some of the risks are covered when the port is being constructed itself. Some of these risks, for example, that will depend the kind of study that you do. Navigation for that, dredging and navigation, they are interrelated if they are studied together, waves and current studies and all. So some of these risks get covered when the port is under construction. Some of these risks will have to be covered when the port has been constructed. For example, all the assets which needs to be insured in order to face any extraordinary situation. I would say that if risk assessment is done properly, safety culture is developed, private ports or greenfield ports would be as good.